Good afternoon, everyone, everywhere, and greetings from Egypt to you all. On behalf of the ILACE Organizing Committee, it's a great honor and pleasure to welcome you all to the 2021 International Language Assessment Conference in Egypt. My name is Mona Mirsel. I'm an English instructor at the American University in Cairo and the co-chair of this year's conference with Hala. ILACE continues to embody the successful partnership between the American University in Cairo and the British Council in Egypt. This year, ILACE continues to go online with more than 20 sessions with presenters and keynote speakers coming from different parts of the world. We are really elated to welcome our distinguished and renowned keynote speakers this year, Dr. Hanan Khalifa, Director of Education, Transformation and Impact, Cambridge Assessment UK, and Mr. Thom Kiddle, Director of Norwich Institute for Language Education UK, both of whom are experts in language assessment with many years of experience and research expertise in this field. With this year's theme, Assessment Post-Pandemic, from Resilience to Sustainability, we've aimed to include various topics and issues to explore this timely and important theme. We do hope you will avail yourselves of this wonderful opportunity by attending a variety of well-selected sessions, which cover a wide range of specialties in assessment. We hope this conference will meet your expectations and it will be an added value to your continuous professional development. ILACE is the result of dedicated work of the organizing committee members who have exerted tireless efforts to serve the ELT professionals in Egypt in particular, and the region in general. I'd like to thank the organizing committee members who have done a wonderful job in creating new initiatives, in addition to following up on their various tasks to the minutest details, ensuring the efficiency and quality measures are met for the conference. Also, I'd like to thank all the participants, presenters, and organizers of the conference for their dedication, passion, and constant support for ILACE. I hope that this will prove to be a very enjoyable and beneficial conference that we will all remember for years to come. Thank you, and over to you, Hal.
Thanks very much, Mona, and good afternoon, everyone, everywhere, and greetings from Egypt to you all. Welcome to the International Language Assessment Conference in Egypt, and thank you very much for joining in from different parts of the world. My name is Hala Ahmed. I'm Head of English Programs at the British Council in Egypt, and I'm co-chairing this year's conference along with my colleague, Mona. At this time of the year, we would have the honor to welcome you all in person in sunny Cairo, but thanks to technology, we're still able to stay connected in person due to the support of technology and host as many participants as possible during our two-day conference. This is our second virtual ILACE conference, and we are sure it will be a rewarding experience as we all continue to develop our assessment practices during these challenging, interesting times. Welcome, and I'm truly happy to be here talking to you all. Back to you, Mona.
Thank you, Hala. Now we will hear some few words from our special guests. First, I'd like to welcome Dr. James Cattler, Dean of SCE, who would like to say a few words to you all today. Over to you, Dr. James.
Hello, everyone, and thank you to the conference co-chairs who just officially opened this meeting of this very important conference. It's important, of course, to the community that it serves. It's also important to me personally, as I think about when I first arrived at AUC 2 years ago, and the very first event that I was involved in was ILACE. It so happened that it was the last time that we met in person, at least for now. And it was a great opportunity to underscore the reality of how this conference in coordination with the School of Continuing Education and the British Council how we reach out to a broad set of constituencies and people who are interested in this topic, but come together and find out new things that they're interested in. I think sometimes it's useful for us to imagine, why do we have conferences at all? Why do we gather together? And there's a wide variety of reasons that have to do with professional development and credentialing and those sorts of things. But I also like to think that it's a great opportunity, even virtually, to meet new people, to hear new ideas, to establish new relationships that can sustain beyond the moment of this conference. So I urge everyone who's involved in the conference to take advantage of all of the offerings, to find ways to connect with people, not only formally in the sessions, but even though it may take extra steps because we're doing it virtually, but to still find ways to connect with people beyond the official offerings of the conference and to establish those relationships. And I think you'll find, as I've heard from people many, many times, that you will see people over and over and over again at this conference, as it happens every year, and at other conferences, at other gatherings. You may find ways to work together on important projects. You may find ways to pick each other's brains about things that are important to you, challenges that you're facing that may be addressed by others. So this is a wonderful conference for that, those kinds of opportunities, and I urge you to take advantage of it. It's also a great opportunity for the School of Continuing Education to be working with the British Council. AUC and the British Council have long-standing presence in Egypt, and I think that, you know, we work together so wonderfully on so many things. Maybe it's a manifestation of the broader special relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States. However it manifests itself, I personally am very, very pleased to be part of it, and always look for more opportunities to work closely with the British Council. I'm always so impressed with the work that they do. Finally, I just want to thank everyone who has worked so hard to put this conference together. These things don't happen by themselves. It takes a great deal of work. I know that ILACE this year was already in the planning stages at the conference last year. And so these are very challenging times. As one of our co-chairs has just said, they continue to be challenging, but we continue to meet these challenges in so many different ways. And one of the silver linings of the dark cloud of this pandemic is finding new ways to see how people step up and do the extra work and do all that is needed. So thank you to the co-chairs. Thank you to everyone at the British Council and the School of Continuing Education, at the organizing committee. And thank you for those who are participating in the conference in one way or another, for taking time out of your working lives to be part of this important event. So on to the next speakers, and good luck with this wonderful conference.
Thanks very much, Dr. James, for your kind words. And before I welcome our next speaker, I'd like to encourage you all to interact with us through the chat box. And if you'd like to post about the ILACE conference on the social media, please remember to use the hashtag ILACE 2021. Now, I'd like to welcome our next speaker for today's opening ceremony, Ruth Cox. Ruth is the British Council Deputy Director in Egypt. Over to you, Ruth.
Thanks, Hella. Hello, everybody. I hope the audio is working okay. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak at this 7th International Language Assessment Conference in Egypt in partnership with the American University in Cairo. We are really proud this conference is going ahead virtually for the 2nd year in a row because of the restrictions by COVID. And I'd like to extend my thanks, as James has, to the American University of Cairo and the School of Continuing Education, and also to the organising committee from both AUC and the British Council. James said, I know pulling off events like this is way more than you can imagine, and what goes on behind the scenes can take a lot of time to get something like this up and running. So well done, everybody, for what looks like going to be a very special conference this year. 1 year on from the pandemic, and we're still in the pandemic, but I think last year people were really more in resilience and survival mode. And this year we have an optimistic look ahead with our theme from resilience to sustainability. The British Council, as James referenced, has been in Egypt for a long time, 83 years to be precise, and we're really, really proud of this fact. I'm very proud of our work in English and education in Egypt. We run a number of initiatives across Egypt and work very closely with the Ministry of Education, both at schools level and higher education level, as well as with the Al-Azhar network in Egypt. And we're very proud of both of these facts. Over the 83 years, we've built trust and strategic partnerships with key stakeholders in the field of education. Our engagement extends to all of the public universities in Egypt, many of the private universities, and we're now working very closely with the new national universities as with the ministry, as well as the national schools and the public schools and some private schools across Egypt. It's incredibly important to the British Council to continue to support Egypt's ambition in language, education and educational reform. And we work at both systems level and institutional level to do this. With capacity building initiatives, we create partnerships with the UK, we support education research and mobility, and of course, English language training, teaching and assessment. Through our teacher training programs, we feel very privileged to be working with the biggest pool of teachers and educators in the Middle East and North Africa. And through our national teacher training program, we work with teachers across every governorate in Egypt, providing teaching and learning resources for English teachers and learners, and building networks with schools and facilitating key thought leadership events like this one. So it's incredibly important for us to continue with that despite the challenges we face from the pandemic. And the British Council commits to continuing to support thousands of teachers across Egypt in teaching, learning and assessment. And moving forward, building on the resilience that our stakeholders showed last year during the pandemic, and really trying to learn from what we learned from last year, taking that forward into a new era and hopefully towards a brighter future than the previous year has allowed us to think about. So I wish you all the best for this conference. I hope it's a really successful couple of days. Enjoy the learning, enjoy the idea exchange, enjoy talking with people from around the globe and hearing experts talk about our work in education and assessment and what we can all learn from each other. The partnership is very important to the British Council, and it's great the UK and the US are coming together like this for language assessment and thought leadership exchange. So yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. Good luck to everybody, and yeah, have a great time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. We're really thrilled to have you today in our opening ceremony. And I'm really pleased to introduce my very dear colleague, John Shackleton from the British Council. John Shackleton is the British Council regional lead in Middle East and North Africa, and he's taking care of our work in teacher professional development across 17 countries. Over to you, John.
Thank you so much, Hala. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I just want to say, we'll make a couple of points really that I think pick up on a couple of things that James said around professional development as being one of the functions of this kind of conference, but also very, very importantly, the finding ways of connecting. So to say a little bit about those two things, and also to echo what Ruth was saying about how we can help and support the Ministry of Education's ambition in terms of education and English language education in particular. The two things that I wanted to mention, the first is about the relationship between assessment in English and teaching and teacher development. So a little bit about that. And also to develop further what Ruth was saying about what our focus is at the British Council in terms of our professional development programs for teachers, teacher development, etc. That I think talk a little bit to the two themes that you've chosen for this conference of resilience and sustainability. So on the first of those 2 points then about the relationship between assessment and teaching and teacher development, I imagine that many of us here today have had to pass some kind of English exam in order to get a job or get into university. And these are really high stake exams, to some extent potentially life-changing, and consequently they therefore exert a huge very significant impact on learning outcomes for English, the way that English is taught, and by extension also the way that teachers are trained. So hugely important relationship there between assessment and various aspects of teaching and learning. And it seems to me, and I would say this, wouldn't I, because my main interest is teacher development, that the key approach to deriving benefit from the different impacts of assessment that I was talking about is really to consider assessment not as a hurdle that needs to be overcome or a barrier to career or educational progression, but as a way of gathering and acting upon diagnostic information. So really for assessment for learning purpose, that's my key interest, and I think my key plea in all of this, so that learners they can see what they need to focus on, for example, so that teachers can plan and deliver their lessons appropriately, and that we can design teacher development programs that give teachers the skills to develop tests, approaches, etc., that are able to give us the information that we need to respond to learner needs. And I think that's a key thing. On the second point, just to talk very briefly about what British Council does and is going to do in teacher development across the Middle East and North Africa, including, of course, Egypt. And there are two things that I think that really stand out that are part of all of our programming. And the first, and I think, again, this is related to something that James was saying about technology and about how we use technology to continue to connect. So one fundamental element of what we do in teacher development is the integration of technology in teaching and learning. And as we all know, this has been accelerated by the impact of school closures. So that's the first kind of horizontal within our programming. And the second, and this is about finding ways to connect. The second is about the integration of collaborative learning in our professional development programs. So technology and integration of technology, what does that actually mean? Well, it's about helping teachers to teach online, but it's also about helping teachers to learn online, and it's also about helping them to integrate the opportunities that new technologies, the internet, that they provide, integrate those and blend them along with more traditional approaches in the face-to-face environment. So that's essentially what we're aiming to do in terms of the integration of technology. And then secondly, around collaborative learning, a fundamental feature of what we do at the British Council in relation to teacher development. So communities of practice, teacher activity groups, etc. They're all now really at the heart of what we do. And this kind of learning, which is teacher determined and context specific, it takes place in an open and supportive learning environment. It's facilitated rather than directed. We believe very strongly that this kind of approach is a really effective way of bringing about professional growth. And I think, importantly, this kind of learning, it's more likely that it will be sustainable, and it's more likely that it will contribute to that resilience that's so important, especially now, to encourage teachers to continue what they're doing, learners to continue learning, and conference organizers to continue organizing conferences, as we have said. If you'd like to know more about what we do, we've got a very good example. It's called the Teacher Networking Initiative. And if you Google British Council Teacher Networking Initiative, you'll come to our website and get lots of information about what we're doing and how we integrate those two things, technology and collaborative learning. If you can't find the website, you can, of course, always ask Hala, who is in many ways the face of the Teacher Networking Initiative. So thank you again for inviting me. The very best of luck for the conference. It really is a very, very interesting program. I was looking at what Thom is going to be talking about, really, key stuff for understanding different ways of assessment and what assessment means. So thank you very much indeed. Have a great conference.
Thank you very much, John, for your a very interesting speech, and that's true. I think everybody in this conference, including myself, is looking very much forward to Thom Kiddle's plenary talk today. We're very much looking forward to learn more from Thom's experience and expertise. Thanks very much, John. And last but not least, our next guest speaker today is Samir Omora. Samir is the president of the NILE-TESOL, and the NILE-TESOL is the biggest, most long existing teacher association, not only in Egypt, but actually in the Middle East and North Africa. Over to you, Samir.
Thank you, Hala. Thank you so much. Hi all, it's a great honor to take part on ILACE 2021 opening ceremony. First of all, I would like to thank the American University in Cairo School of Continuing Education, the British Council, the ILACE co-chairs, Ms. Hala Ahmed and Ms. Mona Mersal, and all the organizing committee. Since 2016, I have attended and presented in ILACE, either face-to-face or online versions. And this is a big event which is usually conducted in September. So September for teachers is now marked by ILACE, which is conducted by two big entities that help to develop teacher development, teaching and learning in Egypt and globally, both the School of Continuing Education and the British Council also. As we all know that since mid-March 2020, everything has changed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. There are lots of health measures, nationwide lockdown, school closure. According to the UNESCO, all these changes and health measures impacted on more than 60% of the world's student population. So language teachers and instructors find themselves now in different challenges. What we all need is to develop how we teach, how we help our students learn, and how we as language teachers and instructors do the assessment. For many years, we used to have traditional ways of assessment like written exams and things like that. But now we find that we have a new context, a new situation in which we need to focus on alternative assessment, learning-oriented assessment, online assessment, virtual feedback, and how our teachers develop themselves and learn to develop themselves on these new areas. What we find themselves now when we have more than 1 year of the pandemic is that the governments and the peoples are working hard to fight the coronavirus. There are health measures, vaccination, social distancing, lots of things like this. On the other hand, we need our teachers to develop and to meet the English language changing and the challenging needs, mainly related to assessment. As a representative of NILE-TESOL Teacher Association, which is mainly funded and supported by the American University School of Continuing Education, it is one of the biggest teacher associations, not only in Egypt and globally. This is a non-profit association. We have 3 key partners. We have the Regional English Language Office at the American Embassy in Egypt, the British Council, and Amidist Egypt. So far, we have different committees, different special interest groups. We have different grants and opportunities for teacher development, including language teaching, language learning, technology, and assessment. We have 9 different special interest groups, or 6, led by Mrs. Maha Hosni, for assessment as one of the most important areas of teacher development. We have the testing, evaluation, and assessment special interest groups, or TAA-SIG, led by Ms. Mona Mersal and Mr. Mustafa Youssef. So far, all these six this summer, throughout the three summer months, have delivered 5 webinars, 3 webinar series, and 1 online debate. All these online activities have been conducted by 36 speakers, and they have been delivered for more than 393 participants or attendees. I think that I was lucky to attend and present at ILACE, either face-to-face and online, as I have mentioned before. However, I wish that we meet on ILACE next year, face-to-face, inshallah. I would like to invite all attendees to enjoy and learn from all the ILACE 2021 online sessions, which are great sessions by great speakers of different areas related to language and assessment at the same time. And I would like you to encourage all the attendees and take all the knowledge and skills from this conference and online sessions back to your schools, back to your peers, back to your students. Especially, we are about to start the new school year. So we are lucky to have ILACE 2021 at that point of time. Please do enjoy your conference, attend so many sessions as possible as you can. Take your knowledge back to your professional learning communities. Enjoy ILACE 2021, and we hope we meet next year face-to-face, inshallah. Thank you so much. Wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samir. Thank you for the some useful information you've given around the NILE-TESOL and the NILE-TESOL special interest groups. I hope our audience today finds this information useful. Thank you very much. Now, I'd like to make a few remarks before I welcome our first keynote speaker for today. So our dear audience listening to us today, you've logged into the event today through the Zoom links you have in the program book, and they are posted on social media everywhere now. Please keep using the same links to join us for both days. So both links work for both days. Just need to decide which room you'd like to join. Is it room 1 or room 2? Then you use both links for both days to join the conference. If you have problems to access the event or any other issues, please send us a message on ilace@aucegypt.edu, and I'm posting the email address in the chat box in a minute now for you. And we'll respond as soon as we can. During the sessions, you'll be listening to our speakers, watching their presentations, but also you can interact by posting your comments through the chat box, and more importantly, you can leave questions you'd like the speaker to answer in the Q&A box. The session moderator will be picking up your questions and direct them to the speaker at the time of the session as time permits. When the session is over, please go back to the conference agenda and find your next session you're interested in. Today, we finish our last session at 6 p.m. Egypt's time, but we'll be here again tomorrow at 11 a.m. Egypt's time. On a final note, I must thank the ILACE organizing committee, Mona, Hanan, May, Betsy, Lamia, Basant, and Marwa, who made tremendous efforts to bring this into light. I also want to thank the American University IT team. They have been incredibly helpful. Now, I'd like to welcome our first keynote speaker, the very much anticipated session, Thom Kiddle. Thom Kiddle is director of Norwich Institute for Language Education, also known as NILE. He has a master's degree in language testing from Lancaster University and the Cambridge Delta, and his role at NILE involves strategic and organizational management and training and consultancy in a range of areas, including testing and assessment, learning technologies, materials development, and language teaching methodology. Thom is also treasurer and founding director of AQUEDUTO, I hope I'm saying this right, the Association for Quality Education and Training Online, webmaster for the Testing, Evaluation and Assessment Special Interest Group of the IATEFL, and vice chair of the Equals Board of Trustees. Thom is going to tell us today about assessment and in an online world. Thank you very much, everybody, and over to you, Thom.
Thank you so much, Hala. Greetings to everybody. What a lot of pressure you've put on me with your kind but very suggestive words from yourself and John about how much relevance my talk is going to have. So I hope to live up to some of those expectations. It's now 3 years since I had the pleasure of being a keynote speaker for the ILACE event in 2018 at the fantastic venue in Cairo, and get to meet so many of you in person. And being invited back after 3 years either means that I didn't do too bad a job last time and let the conference organizers down, or enough time has passed in the interim that those misdemeanors have been forgotten. So thank you very much to the ILACE organizing committee and to the American University in Cairo and British Council for inviting me back and for asking me to give the opening plenary of this as everybody has said, very important conference for teachers and educators and testers and language education professionals across Egypt and the Middle East and North Africa region, and also globally. It's a really important time for us to come together and to bring our thoughts together and to work together in rebuilding, revisiting our long-held traditional concepts of what education and assessment should be about in the light of what we've all undergone together in the last 18 months. So my theme is assessment in an online world, and I'm coming from a perspective of being based in the UK. NILE seems the most appropriate organization title for talking to you in Egypt, and that's certainly not missed, particularly with our logo as well, which I'm sure many of you can identify with. But it also has given me the opportunity to work with teachers and testers from countries around the world and to hear the similarities and the differences in which they've embraced or rejected or come into conflict with the challenges of moving teaching, learning and assessment into online context, online platforms, online tools, very much in an emergency response mode in the first days of the pandemic really hitting us, and the changes that it brought about so rapidly, unforeseen and unprecedented and unplanned for. And then this kind of consolidation and innovation and creativity, and now this future-proofing phase we're coming in. What do we want to hold on to as face-to-face teaching returns? What are the benefits, the affordances, the opportunities from what we've learned in the last 18 months, and what we can see ahead of us that we really want to hold on to as assessment principles, assessment practices, how they integrate with our teaching and learning principles. So I want to try and bring all these in. I get the fortunate position, I'm in the fortunate position as the opening plenary speaker of just sowing seeds and whetting your appetite for some of the topics that are coming up through the program. And hopefully I've managed to cover many of the themes which will be addressed in more detail, with more rigor, with more practical examples in many of the sessions we've seen in the conference program. I'm going to try to address the thorny issue of whether we should be testing at this moment in education, what our strengths might be as individuals and institutions, and how we can emphasize them and bring them to the fore in the way in which we approach our assessment practices, what delivery might mean in an online world. Whatever we design in terms of our assessment practices, we need to bring them to our learners, to our candidates, to our test takers in some form. What this might have sparked in terms of innovation, but also revisiting alternatives to assessment and alternative assessments within our field, which has a long history and a rich history of alternative assessment. But I think that the pandemic has encouraged many people to revisit those ideas and to think about them again, and what their value might be in an online setting. I'll try and address the elephant in the room. Why isn't online testing as secure by nature as it might be in a face-to-face setting when we have invigilators and moderators and identity checks, and what can we do about that as a profession? And also try to touch on this topic which I think is really important, which is language change, and how does the language we use, and therefore the language we assess and evaluate and teach, how does that change when so much of our communication has moved online, when people are working from home, communicating online, learning online, teaching online? Does this change the very nature of the way we communicate, and therefore the way we need to assess the real world uses of language performance? And finally, what can we do if we take the approach that formative assessment is essentially empowering for teachers, and that's very much one of my beliefs? How do we build that into the teaching and learning process so it's not a barrier, as John mentioned, but it is something that can be embraced and seen as a fundamental part of the teaching and learning process? I strongly believe that every teacher is an assessor. From the moment they walk into the classroom, we're constantly making decisions, and if those decisions about whether to move on, about whether to do some revision, about whether to give a test at that moment, about whether to nominate a particular student, if those are based on data, then we're assessing. And whether that's informal or formal, it's still part of our role as teachers. And so I think that this should be embedded within the educational structures, and a huge part of that is the professional development of teachers and educators and instructors within our language education community. So that's what I'm going to aim to cover, but I also want to remind you of a couple of things. These things were mentioned pre-pandemic, and they're still very true today. Two great quotes which I think summarize really important aspects of our sector, the language assessment sector. These things that we need to hold dear, and to be fair to ourselves, to remember and to realize that just because we can give a mark to something, just because we can ask an objectively marked question on it, doesn't necessarily mean it counts towards what language use might be, what language performance might be. Just because we can make discrete items out of language components doesn't mean that they necessarily add up to the sum of all the parts. Doesn't mean that they count for as much as we would perhaps we would intend in the way we measure. And we also need to remember that not everything that really does count in language learning and language education can be counted. Of course, we know how important attitude and motivation and aptitude and focus and feedback are. How do we count motivation? It's impossible. We can't say you're a 3 and you're a 5, and no more should we try to do that. And we need to remember that there are lots of things within learning that can't be counted, and so measurement shouldn't dominate our assessment practice. We need to bring in other aspects of learning good practice and shared practice that that enhance and embrace a broader picture of what education is. And the second quote there from Brian North, one of the leading figures in the development of the Common European Framework of Reference, is to remind ourselves that it's far more complicated than rocket science. We are still trying to understand the complexity of the language phenomena in the brain. We are still trying to work out how reception turns into production, where things are stored, how they're retrieved from. Of course, different neurolinguistic computer assessments and eye tracking scans and scans of the brain when it's processing language will help, but it's still an incomplete theory exactly about how language is learned and how language is used, particularly second language and the interaction between first and second language. Yet, as education professionals, we're tasked with describing this hugely complex phenomena in a short number of words, maybe for the stakeholders that aren't education experts, the parents, the students themselves, the end users of tests. We have to put things into a small number of words for marking, rating criteria, so that they can be used reliably and consistently by a whole team of assessment raters. We have to do this in simple words that can be understood. So we've got a real tough task, and we shouldn't underestimate the size and the complexity of that task, and we shouldn't be too hard on ourselves to understand that we're taking steps and we're learning from each other, and we need help and we need support and we need to learn from others' experiences, and we're not going to develop the perfect test, if there was such a thing, the first time we do it, and we can be iterative and we can be open to change and we can listen to feedback as part of that test development process. So these are really important concepts to hold on to as we move through the presentation. And I'd like to kind of give you a visual representation. We've all been involved. I think I'm talking to a community here of language educators, whether you're a classroom teacher or a language instructor in a university, or involved in test development, or some other aspect of the educational sector. It's been a tough 18 months in this move to teaching and assessing online, and it hasn't been the same journey for everybody. Where would you put yourself? Which character on the bridge kind of is your current state of thinking of how you've coped with this challenge of teaching and assessing online over the last 18 months? What changes you've had to embrace, to accommodate, to deal with, whether those are external pressures, whether those are your internal pressures, whether those are practicality concerns, whether those are technical infrastructure concerns. Are you on the left-hand side of the bridge thinking, I hope this is all over because I haven't been able to do any of the things that I hoped I'd be able to do? Are you halfway along the bridge thinking, am I going in the right direction? Have you leapt off the bridge? If so, you're possibly not going to be in this conference, but maybe you're looking back for old time's sake. Have you reached what you think is a conclusion, a satisfactory set of practices, procedures, protocols for delivering your assessment online, and you can feel very proud of that? Have you done that collaboratively? We've all had different experiences in this journey in learning how to bring things online. Some of us with a wealth of experience pre-pandemic, and some of us who've learned overnight and have been learning on the job. I think there's one key figure in here, perhaps the wisest figure here, and it's this figure I've coloured in red. What do you think this character is saying to his colleagues, his peers on the bridge? What's he saying there? He could be perhaps shouting encouragement. If you think you can encapsulate his words in a short phrase, you could perhaps put it in the chat box. What's he saying to those colleagues there about the journey of learning how to teach and assess online? Well, in my opinion, he's not shouting encouragement, but he is giving some very important information. He's saying, hey guys, there's another bridge over there. And I think that's the reality of change and educational reform, is we cross one bridge and then we come to another. And it's a constant professional development, and much as it should be, but we can never rest on our laurels. We're never at a place of we've done it all. We're always learning, and particularly with the integration of technology and assessment, we're always seeing new possibilities and new challenges ahead. And we need to be clear that whatever stage we're on of this journey, it's part of a bigger journey. And that's the transition from resilience in the now to sustainability for the medium and the longer term. How do we face that next bridge, and what have we learned from this particular phase of our journey that we can take forward? And particularly in terms of assessment online, because there are lots of different components to assessment online. It's a little bit like the Indian folktale. Perhaps you have something similar in folktales in Egypt, this idea of 5 blind men asked to describe an elephant, and each one gives a different description because none of them can see the bigger picture. And so conferences like this are absolutely crucial, bringing together different aspects of different features of online assessment, and people to talk together and share their experiences of what aspect they've been particularly concerned with, what successes they've had, what challenges they've overcome. So bringing us and giving us sight of what's happening amongst peers and the similarities and differences in the challenges and how we've overcome them is really one of the key features of an event like this. So congratulations again to the resilient ILACE committee for making this a sustainable event through the pandemic and for bringing it online. So with that extended introduction, should we be testing? Is it fair in this current climate, in the upheaval that we've seen in terms of moving education online, just the learning process, the contact with our students, the need for new familiarity, is it fair to test that learning in the ways we used to, in the ways we did when we had people in a classroom, we could hand out pen and paper, when we could monitor them, when we could set time limits and observe their behavior in the classroom and clamp down on any copying and these things? Is it fair that we should try and impose an assessment process when we're still, let's be honest, working out what good practice is, what contextually relevant practice is in the teaching and learning process? Is it fair to test that? It's certainly not clear in any context that I've had contact with, and particularly in my own context here in the UK, that anybody's got the right answers about how to test and how to deal with assessment. Very controversial approaches here in the UK to final summative testing of school leavers at 16 and 18. Real messes made in the decisions by the Ministry of Education, which have had profound life-changing implications for those people affected by introduction of algorithms or basing the grade you're able to get on the previous performance of your school over the last 5 years. Really poorly thought through or naive expectations of how we can move a traditional assessment model onto a time of upheaval. The question we have to ask ourselves is, are we ready for that challenge, and how can we adapt to it, and whether traditional testing is the way we should be looking? Do we trust ourselves and our students to move our approaches to assessment into different spheres, into different time frames, into different interaction patterns, into different feedback models, into different score interpretations? Are we ready for that, and can we do as good a job as we want to do for our own professional satisfaction and our own professional competence in that space as well? In other words, how do we move from this resilience to, yes, I know I've got to give them a test because it's part of my syllabus, and I've moved everything online, so the test has to be online, through to a sustainable model where we feel we're keeping the best bits of what online assessment has brought to us, and jettisoning the others or putting them on the side to be revisited when the students are ready, when the teaching body's ready, when the technology's ready, or when the educational landscape is ready for embracing these new ideas. So what could those alternatives be? Well, one of the alternatives we have is to take the same models of assessment, the same constructs, the same assessment tasks, the same test papers into an online format, transform our pen and paper tests into online tests, use the virtual learning environments that we have, use the third-party tools that are available to do a very similar thing. Or we could move towards trusting the teachers more. And we know how fantastically resilient teachers have been in Egypt, in the UK, in contexts around the world, in dealing with a move to teaching and learning online. Are we able to give them that confidence and trust in the assessment online, giving more teacher power over grades and assessment of performance, and perhaps then allowing that to take not just summative focuses, but also more of a continuous approach, using classroom activities as assessment activities, part of that learning-oriented assessment that was mentioned by Samir in his introduction. To what extent can we move that towards a self-awareness, goal setting and expectation realization on the part of the learners, bringing self-assessment in, using the technological affordances to give learners more insight into their own learning progress, to make their learning visible through recording, through being able to hear back their own spoken production, for example, or to compare with peers in virtual settings. All of these potentially possible for encouraging self-assessment to be a part of our assessment practices. Can we revisit the portfolio assessment models? I know there are presentations coming in this conference on portfolio assessment and how important that might be in gathering this bigger picture, because essentially what we're doing in language assessment, in all educational assessment, is trying to get a representative sample of performance that we can give feedback on or report on if a score is necessary. So where we get that sample from and how we gather that sample might lend us to very much the thinking towards gathering that over time, gathering that in multimodal ways, gathering that in a multitude of examples rather than a single snapshot of performance. So can we change what we assess? And that might mean revisiting the work on integrated assessment that I was talking about 3 years ago, integrating the skills as they're used in real life language use. Can we think about open book exams, more asynchronous assessment if we're using online platforms, so that learners have a broader time frame to bring in the resources that they can and they need, just as they would in real life settings when they're using that language for professional or academic purposes. And can we change how we assess that in terms of what we're awarding marks for, scores for, giving feedback on, and how we're supporting learners through that assessment process? If we're going to take on that challenge, if we're going to take those opportunities and run with them, well, we need to think, well, what do we do well? What do we do best as teachers or as institutions and perhaps as national education systems? What can you handle best as a education professional? What can you handle best if you're part of a testing unit at a university or a testing department at a school? Where is the quality in your organization? Where's your human resource strengths? Where are your real assets to capitalize on, if that's not too much management speaks? Because we know that when we're designing those multiple choice questions, those short answer questions which have 1 word or 2 word answers, those gap fill questions, really the quality for test use and test accuracy and the scores that we get from those tests lies in the hands of the item writers, the test designers, the people who put those tests together. Really difficult and not something that every teacher is a natural at, and not something that many teachers have had training in, to how to design a good multiple choice question, how to design a good test bank of items, how to design those objectively marked items so that they work consistently and reliably for all the students, and they're not biased, and they don't have multiple correct answers, and they don't wrongly discriminate the strong from the lower performing candidates across the test. But we may be that you have a really strong item writing team, and you have a bank of items that you can use, and therefore actually that more objective model is the way to take forward, because it's potentially much easier to move that kind of delivery approach into an online setting with those objective marking platforms and computer-based clerical marking that online does very well. It may be, on the other hand, that your quality lies in your test markers, in the test raters, the people who mark those assessments, the subjective judges of quality. And that then leads us to thinking about perhaps the productive skills, where we're asking learners to make constructed responses, to give a oral presentation, to participate in an extended conversation, to write an extended piece of writing. Because there, okay, we need a good set of marking criteria to guide them, but our quality lies in the hands of our test rating experts. And normally that's our teaching team, the people who know the students, the people who know the language, the people who know their profession. So it may be that we need to make a decision about where we're putting weight in our assessment programs, in our assessment approaches, based on the quality of what we can do well in our institutions or as individuals in our classroom. Where's my strength? Am I a great writer of objective selected response items, or I'm much better at being consistent in my marking of essay-based questions or my use of marking criteria. And we may need to consider the multitude of different tools and platforms that allow us to do those things and to do them differently for the different skills, rather than saying we have to use a single platform. And obviously that means that you'll have considered over the past 18 months, if you have a virtual learning environment where you work, that you've considered its own capacity. These kind of platforms that are open source, or that are licensed, or that are third-party freemium products, where we can see a range of assessment options, whether that's testing options that are based around quizzes and questionnaires and polls, or whether that's those assignment-based, more extended response questions. Most, if not all, of the virtual learning environments have that kind of assessment capacity within them. But also, we're not constrained necessarily, and the beauty of online and the beauty of freemium models and educational subscriptions, and particularly those that have been made more available through the pandemic, in that sense of working together, give us many more opportunities. I know some of these will be explored in sessions later in the conference, but just to give a flavour, we know that we have opportunities there for assessing the productive skills online, for doing things to capture spoken responses to tasks, and to revisit them and to make them available for peer assessment and self-assessment and teacher-led assessment. There are third-party tools to do that, a multitude of tools that allow learners to do presentations online, to collaboratively add their responses, to respond in the same virtual space to a particular task. We know there are tools that capture receptive knowledge or understanding or comprehension, these platforms that allow us to make quizzes, to share those quizzes via a multitude of devices, to process the responses to those quizzes in different formats, to quickly get a sense of progress, or to diagnose particular aspects of language performance and to act on those and to share that feedback. We know that some of the non-educational tools can do these things very well. Tools that weren't designed for education or educational measurement can be repurposed very usefully to allow us to insert content, to insert prompts, to insert audio, to insert video, and to collect that data very quickly and effectively online. And we know that there are educational applications that do similar jobs, tools that actually are designed for educational measurement or teaching and learning, that can be appropriated for assessment purposes, giving an opportunity for learners to respond to the content that we produce. And similarly, there are a whole range of tools for portfolio assessments, and I hope these will be covered in some of the sessions as well. These dedicated e-portfolio platforms which are designed for educational use and for gathering learners' information and sharing it with the appropriate recipient, but also the non-educational platforms which can be transformed into portfolio spaces for learners to curate their own content, to share multiple examples of their own language performance and language interests and language responses to authentic language. So all of these platforms which curate and save and potentially share and allow multiple access to multimodal responses from learners are really potentially crucial in that decision-making process. What do we have access to? How do they fit in with our institutional individual strengths? And what can we best embrace as we have experienced them perhaps in the past on a tentative basis? What have we learned and what can we take forward, and what examples of good practice are we seeing emerging from our peers in other institutions, other individual teachers and other countries? So there's an awful lot we can do there, but we have to address a bit of a challenge, a bit of a big thorny problem. I mean, I don't know how you feel about these skills, sometimes referred to as 21st century skills. I think we'd probably follow some of the comments in the opening speeches, that collaboration and collaborative learning and team working and sharing of ideas and co-construction of knowledge is fairly fundamental to learning. That finding creative solutions to problems, to thinking for yourself and thinking outside the confinements of the space you've been given into work in is very useful and a very powerful tool to have in a 21st century professional world. That peer communication and support and helping your neighbor is really fundamental to learning, and actually allows us to follow that kind of Vygotskian principle of learning from the social engagement with our peers and with our supportive, more knowledgeable others, and that's a crucial part of learning. And also taking advantage of what's out there in the wealth of information and resources that are in the internet, using your digital literacy to bring that to bear on your learning and to make it support your learning. All of these things would seem to me to be fundamentally important in education, and things that we would respect and respond to and try to bring into our teaching and learning. But you look at those four in the context of testing and assessment, and you think, well, collaboration and teamwork, thinking outside the box, not answering in the space I've given you, talking to your peers, using the internet to help you, that's cheating. How do we square that circle when we look at online assessment particularly? How do we change this mindset that all of these things that we like about education and learning, when we talk about testing and assessment, they seem as bad things, they seem as negatives, they seem as things that contaminate the purity of the score and the interpretations of the score about the individual. What can we do to solve this problem? Because we know we can't visit everybody's house and check that they've got no other devices in their rooms, and check that they're the only person with the webcam on, and they won't have an internet breakdown when they're doing the test, and they haven't got something on their laps that they can look at as well. We can't do that. We have to be realistic and practical about our approaches as well. Well, perhaps we can redefine our views of what cheating is, and this is changing what we assess. Maybe we can reframe our views of cheating and think of it as a useful pedagogical activity. I mean, if you think of cheating for an exam or cheating for a test in my day, and perhaps many of your days, cheating essentially meant cramming, thinking about what the most important topics were, thinking about what the key words or the key phrases were, and then writing them on my arm or putting them on a piece of paper inside my pencil case so I could refer to them in the exam. Well, actually, that process of identifying the key points, identifying the key topics, the things I really need to remember, the things that are central to me, the things that are personalized to me and help me do better in a performance situation, they're fantastic pedagogical activities. They're really the things that are important to me. They're important to the learning process. Actually, the preparation for cheating is a fantastic learning opportunity. So reframing the idea of how would you prepare to cheat in this test? I'm not going to give you the opportunity to cheat, but I'm going to allow you to prepare to cheat. What is your crib sheet? What is your secret phrase that helps you to remember things? These are really good pedagogical activities. Perhaps we need to think a bit differently though. Maybe we need to think about those kind of creativity and collaboration and cooperation aspects of language use as explicit parts of our criteria. They're the things we want to measure because we know how important they are in real world language use. Maybe these are the things that we need to be including in our marking criteria. There's a lot of support for that in the new mediation descriptors in the Common European Framework Companion volume that really talk about using language in collaboration with others, supporting others' understanding with your use of language. So maybe that's part of what we should be assessing. It's not just how you can use language on your own, but it's how you can use language in collaboration and support of others. Maybe we need to change the nature of some assessment tasks. Maybe we need to make them more open book and encourage use of digital resources. How well can you use a translation engine to move this text from one genre to another, for example? How effective is your translation approach, and is that part of your learner training that you're going to take on board? All of these things that we might change the nature of the assessment task to make the cheating a fundamental part of what you need to do. The operationalization of it is more about collaboration or creativity or digital literacy than it is necessarily about pure language performance. Maybe we just need to recognize that real world expectations are that learners, when they're using language for their own purposes and for professional purposes and for academic purposes, they will need to collaborate, they will need to use digital resources, they will need to use online tools, they will need to have time to plan and prepare, particularly if they're doing things in a second language or a third language. They'll need all of these things in the real world, so maybe we should make more affordance for them in the assessment space and in the educational space. And perhaps we just need to try and be a bit more discriminatory about the huge difference between copying someone else's work and collaborating on a new piece of work together, and make those distinctions quite clear in how we view our assessment practices, and reframing that in students' eyes as well. Of course, I'm not naive. I know that the high stakes of assessment means that sometimes we need to invigilate, we need to proctor, we need to know that it's one person's score and that they've deserved that score. And what can we do as individuals or institutions without necessarily a budget to invest in this remote proctoring software or these overlaying systems which check candidate identity through matching their identity card with their webcam and check for constant eye connection with the screen. Well, we do need to investigate those approaches, look at what the exam boards are doing, look at the technologies that they've learned and developed and brought to the market, brought to the testing world over the last 18 months and before, but not measure ourselves by those standards. There's a huge wealth of technology going into this because it's so important for those high stakes, life-changing exams and the recognition of them, that we can capitalize on all of that research and all of that work that's being done. And we can also think, what can I do better because it's online? What can I do better than I would have been able to in a face-to-face setting? What can I actually improve through my assessment? Can I use recording functions to make more of the way I assess speaking online, for example? Can I monitor students doing writing tasks live by having live collaborative documents that I can see what they're writing at real time, and I can flick between my students' documents to check what they're putting in and their speed of work and their copying and pasting or otherwise? Can I get them to do formative assessment tasks through the chat box while we're in a synchronous session online? That really adds to my understanding of their progress, that can be directed just to me rather than shared with the others. Can I use the affordances of technology that people can post their responses, but they can't see each other's until I reveal them? So there's a teacher-led assessment and then a peer assessment phase. All of these are possible with the different settings that we have in online tools. If I have to assess in a very formal, structured way, what are the procedures that I need to explain to students? How are we going to deal with the devices that they might have supplementary to the one they're doing the test on? What do I need to accommodate in terms of connectivity and internet infrastructure and camera use and camera protocols? And how can I drop in during assessment tasks to make sure they are who they say they are, they're doing what they say they want to? All of these have been practices that have been developed perhaps too much in isolation, and we need that consolidation phase to add to our sustainability, where we see and learn from each other's experience about what works well in related contexts. So crucial aspects to think about in terms of cheating and test security. And we also need to think then about whether the language we're using has changed. Online communication has become a norm for so many of us around the world. I do acknowledge there are contexts in which that's a very restricted form of remote contact, whether it's mediated by traditional dumb phones rather than smartphones, or very basic or intermittent internet access. But for so many people, and for an increasing number of people in the future, that online communication is going to be a feature of how language is used and how language develops, and therefore it's incumbent on us to think about that in terms of how language is measured, how language is assessed, and how language progress is supported and encouraged. too much text for you to read, but I just wanted to show you that this is covered in the new companion volume of the Common European Framework of Reference. There are explicit scales for online communication and online interaction. It's starting to get that recognition that there are fundamental differences in the way we use language online than the way we might use it in face-to-face interaction. Some of those things in bullet points at the bottom there, that we need to have more redundancy in our messages. We need to reiterate things, and we need to allow people the processing time. We need to constantly check for understanding, because we may not be able to read those body language and short response formats of listening comprehension or interactive listening, as it's called in the literature. We need to be able to reformulate and to rephrase and to paraphrase and to circumlocute in the way we use our language and the way we use specific vocabulary and the way we deal with breakdowns in communication. And we need to understand that emotional interaction across online platforms may be very different, particularly when we come to text use and the way text is employed in its shortened forms, in acronym use, in capitalization, in lack of punctuation, and expectations about the between the sender and the recipient, in kind of communities of language use, in our what's called our sociolect, that what we expect our peers and colleagues to understand about our language use. All of these are important things about language change, and perhaps deserve to be incorporated in the scales and the way we talk about measuring language. For example, the online interaction scale at B2 from the Common European Framework recognizes that online exchanges need to link previous contributions to the current one, and there may well be a third party in there moderating. This is very different from the way language is described in what's it called, overall oral production, considering face-to-face communication, for example. So these scales now maybe give us support to rethink what we're assessing when we're measuring language use online. It has implications for the way we design our tasks, whether we think about born digital tasks that involve online communication as the a priori task in our assessment, rather than it's a speaking task that we would have done face-to-face, so I'll put it in an online setting. Whether we change our rating criteria, whether we include that reference to redundancy and repair and checking understanding in those categories that we have for a speaking assessment, such as discourse management and interaction. Whether we have different interaction models, whether we can hold on to that peer-to-peer pair assessment model, or whether it's incumbent to have a single assessor and a single candidate in online assessment. How we give feedback, the multitude of feedback we can give, and the multimodal feedback we can give, I think, really importantly, and how we use self-assessment in online communication. And I've put just a short exchange with my 12-year-old son there, who's berating me for using full stops in my online communication with him, and not enough short forms of words and phrases, just to see that his world of online communication is very different from his spoken communication, or my conception of online communication taken from more formal written channels, perhaps. And finally then, very briefly, what can we do with formative online assessment? Potentially the most empowering side of assessing online, being able to create opportunities for giving supportive feedback and diagnosing issues and repairing those issues. I'd go as far as to say there's no such thing as a formative test that's different from a summative test. All summative tests can be used formatively, because formatively means what we do with the results or the data or the information we've learned from that test. Better to think, well, I'm assessing with a formative purpose because I want to give that support, or I'm assessing summatively because I want to give a score, a mark, a grade. And that means that we need to consider who the formative feedback is for. Is it for the teacher? Is it for the learner? Is it for the whole class? How do my online tools and my platforms allow me to do that? What are the multimodal options? How can I build that into my syllabus? Is it that I do that a little bit in every session? Is there a dedicated assessment and feedback option? Can I build that into my portfolio building activities? Is it at a regular point in the syllabus? How much of an impact is giving that kind of supportive, formative feedback on assessment tasks, that learning-oriented assessment, going to impact on my teacher time? And how much can I encourage learners to be on board with this? How much can I help learners learn to learn by using the information that perhaps the tools themselves can give learners, or they can find out about themselves from looking at the visibility of their own language use, or they can get from the teacher. I did have a couple of examples of that, but I'm going to move on because I know I'm really at the end of my time. I just want to leave you with one thought. This is then a test question to finish off the opening plenary in an assessment conference, and this perhaps for those of you at the American University of Cairo, just to realize that whatever we do, however we approach our assessment challenges, our candidates, our learners will always surprise us. Our best written assessment instruments, our carefully designed tests will always be confounded by our learners. This beautifully designed question seems to have a single answer. And what does the learner do when he's faced with this? Thinks creatively, thinks out of the box, and brings in something that was not what the test designer was expecting. That will happen all the time. We need to learn with it, and that's part of our resilience, and it's also part of our sustainable approach to assessment. Thank you so much for listening. Please do contact me if you have any questions or comments. Please do visit the NILE website. Membership's free. There's loads of great assessment resources in there, as well as teaching and learning resources. Thank you, Hala. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the ILACE conference.
Thanks, Tom. Before you go, Tom, we've got a couple of questions for you, if this is okay, very swiftly, really. A question from Adil Badawi. Of course, cheating is related to negative attribute or act, while collaboration is something positive. How can we turn the negative cheating in collaboration in learning? Of course, cheating has nothing to do with honest assessment, especially if it's a summative assessment. What's your take on this, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to make a distinction between the purpose of the assessment and the necessary security of it. And I understand that there are summative exit testing, proficiency testing, where security is paramount in our considerations. But I don't think we should deny the fact that that collaborative activity is a key part of learning, and that if we allow the idea that all collaboration, all use of digital resources, all preparation and using the resources is a bad thing in assessment context, that's kind of the tail wagging the dog. And actually, in many of our contexts, much of the formative assessment tasks, much of the useful feedback, the diagnostic information we can give will be enhanced by seeing what resources learners bring to it from their external world, seeing how they can work collaboratively. And of course, I'm not naive enough to say that every test task should be done collaboratively, or every test task should be open book and given learners to opportunity to use other resources. But I do think it's worthy of thinking of those aspects which are generally considered negative in testing, whether they're negative in all testing, or whether they should be part of learning processes in other forms of assessment other than the high stakes, high security final tests.
Yeah, thanks. Next and last question, really. Do we have to change, that's from Sara Zaki, do we have to change the rubrics of the skills to only those which can be assessed online?
Well, I think you first have to answer the question, are you going to only assess online? And if your decision is that your assessment practices going forward will be 100% online, then you need to consider the type of language that those assessment tasks will generate, the type of real, authentic language that will be generated by someone doing a similar task in an online setting in a target language use context, and think, well, is the nature of that language production or the nature of that language interaction different? if so, then your criteria should reflect that. I think absolutely.
Thanks very much, Tom. That was really, really useful and informative. And if you can check the chat box, we're receiving so many positive comments on your presentation. It's been a pleasure and honor, really, to have you today as our keynote speaker for the ILACE 2021 conference. Thank you very much.